The last set of Bootstrap classes we're going to look at in this lesson are those that are used to style forms. And Bootstrap follows a particular pattern when styling forms, which are that typically, at least for text-based input, we have a form group and a form control. The form control is the actual input that we want users to enter information in, and those go within a form group. And the form group simply divides different user input. Now, all this should look familiar from our HTML lesson, so I'm not going to get into what each of these elements are, but all we need to note here is that when we have an input that's a text-based input, we want to add this form control class to it when we're using the Bootstrap framework, and we want to nest our label and input inside of a form group class div. And we also want to be conscientious that we should only have one input per form group. That is, we should only have one form control per form group. In this case, we ask the user to input their email address, so let's add one other form group to this where they input their password. And then finally, let's have them submit their email and password into the form. And we'll notice that the submit is a button element of type submit and no special classes or anything here other than the Bootstrap button classes we discussed in the previous section. Let's go to our browser to see how this looks on our web page. Right off the bat, we can see how much nicer these input elements are styled than the default HTML elements. But maybe I don't want these inputs to be block level. Maybe I want them to be inline instead. Let's see how we might do that. It turns out all I have to do is add the form inline class to my form element. And bam, my form elements are now inline. We've seen how we can style text-based input elements using Bootstrap. Now let's see how we can style things like checkboxes and radio buttons. We'll begin with checkboxes. And checkboxes are actually even simpler than text input. All we need to do is wrap our checkbox input in a checkbox div class. And we do that for each of our checkbox options. And by the way, if we want our checkboxes to appear inline, we can do that by using the checkbox inline rather than the checkbox class. And radio buttons work the exact same way. We nest each radio button within its own div that has the class radio or radio inline assigned to it. Let's go back to our browser to see how each of these display on the web page. Very good, we have two checkbox elements and two radio button elements displaying inline.